Let's get Alex Kennedy's take. Hoopshype.com, NBA writer over there. He talks to us weekly on the NBA. We'll get into the playoffs, the NBA draft lottery, some of the offseason stuff, and get his take on all of the NBA things that are happening right now, Alex. And I don't know, you interested, you excited for Game 2 tonight? Does Boston steal one on their home floor?
Yeah, I don't think so. Both series right now are really just anticlimactic. It's unfortunate, but hopefully it leads to an excellent finals matchup between Cleveland and Golden State. You just look at what happened in that first game. Cleveland just dominated, and it's not a huge surprise. If you look at the first round matchup between Boston and Chicago, even though Boston won, Robin Lopez was like a superstar because they have no one down low that can really defend and rebound. So, Kevin Love is going off. Tristan Thompson isn't missing any shots. LeBron's doing whatever he wants, especially in the paint. I just don't think it's a good matchup for Boston. And it's crazy. We talked about this recently about, how Boston chose not to go out the trade deadline and add a rim protector or add a perimeter defender. And, I know part of it is because they want to keep their championship window open. They didn't want to move that Nets pick. But, you could have went out and added a veteran rim protector or a PJ Tucker type player for, not too much. So I think it's pretty crazy that they didn't, make some of those adjustments and see some of these weaknesses ahead of time. But I just don't think this is going to be a competitive series. Maybe Boston takes one game if Isaiah Thomas goes off and guys like Avery Bradley and Al Horford shoot the ball well. But I think it's pretty clear Cleveland's the better team.
I mean, if they would have gone out at the deadline and used the pick this year to go get a Paul George or a Jimmy Butler, and they said, look, we're still not there, they still have the Nets pick again next year, right? I mean, they still had another bullet in the chamber.
Yeah, exactly. They did. And I think that's why some Celtics fans were so frustrated, because it wasn't an either-or thing. You could still have gotten maybe a Jimmy Butler or a Paul George and then still, had that pick next year to be able to draft a stud prospect and, build around them going forward. So you could have been a even better contender this year while still having that pick next year. There was some talk at the deadline that, teams like Indiana and Chicago were asking for both draft picks. But I think that was more, Chicago and Indiana just trying to see if they possibly could get those kind of picks. But those offers are pretty crazy. I mean, obviously Boston's not giving up 2 potential number 1 overall picks for one of those guys. So I think they could have gotten a deal done and still had next year's pick, but they didn't do it. I think part of the reason was they didn't believe that they were a contender, a championship contender with Jimmy Butler or Paul George on their team. I think they thought, even with those guys, let's say they have Butler, Isaiah Thomas, Al Horford, I think they still thought that, Golden State was a better team, that Cleveland was maybe a better team. So I think they believed it made more sense to keep the first overall pick and almost look ahead to the future and think, okay, maybe it makes more sense to be a contender 4 or 5 years from now, whenever Markelle Fultz is reaching his prime and we've built around him. I think there had to be some kind of lack of confidence in, that type of big three of Isaiah, Horford, and Butler or George. Otherwise, I think they would have pulled the trigger on a deal.
Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com, at Alex Kennedy NBA. That being said, they have the number 1 pick. The consensus number 1 seems to play point guard. So what does Boston's mindset with number 1 now? Do they trade out? Do they grab another point guard? Is the future murky for Isaiah Thomas or Avery Bradley? Because it seems that this is a guard-driven draft, and they have the key to it all at number 1.
I think they go Markelle Fultz, and I think the plan is to play Markelle Fultz and Isaiah Thomas together, which means Avery Bradley could be on the way out, as you mentioned. Avery Bradley, actually, I think it's possible they were looking to trade him anyway because he's someone who is going to be coming up on a contract, contract year pretty soon. They'd have to pay him a ton of money, and he has value right now. They can trade him and possibly land, a very good draft pick or a talented player. So I think, they want to play Fultz and Thomas together. Fultz and Thomas are actually friends because they both went to Washington, and Isaiah worked out with Fultz last offseason. So, I mean, they know each other and there's a relationship there. And I think also they can work together. Fultz is someone who is 6'4", so, he could guard opposing, guards that are bigger, and, they could still hide Isaiah on the defensive end. But I think offensively, Fultz can be a distributor and a scorer, and Isaiah plays really well off the ball. He can shoot the ball really well. He's a good catch and shooter. He can drive off of plays like that. So I think they can play together. So I think Fultz is the pick. And if they were to trade it, I mean, obviously now the pick does have more value than it did at the trade deadline because everyone knows it's the number 1 overall pick. But I think it would just have to be a crazy offer for them to seriously consider it, because Fultz is a special player. I think most people think Fultz can be, a superstar type player. He just turned 19 years old and he was dominant this past year. His future is very bright.
Alex, if the narrative is then that the Cavs, though, are so head and shoulders above the rest of the East, is there anything that teams like the Celtics or maybe the Wizards can do this offseason to put themselves in position to actually compete and get closer to that level where the Cavs are?
Well, Boston has talked about, going out and adding a free agent. They've been linked to Gordon Hayward and Blake Griffin and guys like that. Now they'd have to make some kind of move to clear up maximum contract space. But they do have, significant cap room, and they want to go out and spend that money. So even if it's not a superstar player or max player, they can go out and add, some difference makers and guys that match up better against Cleveland. I think if you're Boston, maybe they didn't expect this, huge jump this year to be the number 1 seed. But, certainly this offseason, you have to anticipate that you're going through Cleveland to make it to the NBA Finals. So they can go out and add a rim protector. They can go out and add a perimeter defender. I think they could look to make a trade, because even outside of Fultz or this number 1 overall pick, they have other assets. I think a guy like Terry Rozier could be traded. Now, especially with Fultz coming in, Rozier, it seems like he could be on the move. He was a draft pick for them a few years ago. He's a young point guard. Rozier could be on the move. Avery Bradley could be on the move. I wouldn't be surprised to see Boston look at the trade market and the free agent market. And then if you're Washington, I think they want to attract another free agent, a significant free agent. Last offseason, the big storyline was that they wanted to try to get Kevin Durant. John Wall was optimistic that he could convince him, or at least get a meeting with him, because they were close. This Washington team is very good. They have a very good backcourt. They are only going to keep getting better. I think they're one piece away, and they know that. So I think they want to go out and try to add a top free agent. They're going to have to pay Otto Porter, who's going to command a lot of money on the free agent market. But they're going to still have, trade options and some money in free agency to be able to go out and add pieces. But even still, Cleveland is just so talented. I'm not sure there's any team out there that can compete with Cleveland's big three and some of the pieces they have around them.
Talk with Alex Kennedy, of course, hoopshype.com, their NBA writer, and, of course, the NBA playoffs continue tonight on 97.3 ESPN. And tomorrow night, we'll have the Western Conference Finals for you as well. The Lakers at 2, slam dunk Ball, or better decision Magic Johnson should make?
I think Lonzo Ball is the guy. I can't stand his father, but I think that I think Lonzo is the second best player on the board, and he's a guy that could really help their team a lot. I think he's also a distributor too, and I think that could work really well, playing alongside D'Angelo Russell and Julius Randle, Larry Nance Jr., some of the other young guys they have there, whereas Fultz is more of a scoring point guard. I think Lonzo is someone that, plays good defense, passes the ball really well, rebounds really well. He can be a matchup nightmare at 6'6". I think he's the second best guy on the board. And if I'm the Lakers, I'm definitely taking him. Even though they have Russell and Clarkson in that backcourt, I think Ball is the guy to go with. And I think, his dad, there's a lot of storylines about him, obviously. And, you have to hope that once Lonzo's in the NBA, that his dad either goes away, or if he does continue to talk and be in the media, that he's not a distraction or harm to the team. You don't want him criticizing Lonzo's teammates or criticizing the front office or things like that. Those are things you have to take into account. But Lonzo's such a good player and such a great person, too. I've interviewed Lonzo multiple times, dating back to when he was a junior in high school, and he's the exact opposite of his dad. It's crazy to me that, LeVar raised Lonzo, and they cannot be more different. Lonzo is the, consummate professional, great teammate. I think he's the guy at number 2 for LA, even though, people are talking a lot about his dad, and they do have some guards there.
His dad, who apparently potty trained him with scarves, too. We're talking to Alex Kennedy here on the Sports Bash. If this happens, though, Alex, would Ball interest the Sixers if he falls to 3? Does he fit with Simmons?
Oh, for sure. I think if Ball were there at 3, that would be amazing for the Sixers. He would be an excellent pick. They're kind of looking for their point guard of the future, and Ball could be that. I think he's a good distributor. He's someone that could make things easier on guys like Embiid and Simmons, and because he is such a good passer, I think he'd be able to, create easy buckets for those guys, and then also play off of Simmons. I know, Philly kind of views Simmons as their point forward, and Ball, because he is so much bigger, I think he could be a problem on the defensive end. I think he could be a guy that, plays off Simmons as well. So, it's unfortunate that Philly didn't land a top 2 pick, because the top 2 point guards are probably going to go 1, 2. And then you have to wonder what they're going to do. Do they go Josh Jackson, who, is very talented, and, but he's obviously not a guard. But if they do, in fact, view Ben Simmons as their point guard and want him bring the ball at the floor and kind of view him as a point forward, sort of like the Bucks with Giannis Antetokounmpo, maybe drafting Josh Jackson and playing him on the wing makes some sense. Or, do they reach on a guy like De'Aaron Fox? That's kind of the question I have. I'm curious to see what Philadelphia does, or if they look to trade the pick.
Right, that seems to be the follow-up is they have 3, they got the pick swap there.
5 and 10.
Let me ask you, Alex, we've talked a lot over the years about the hinky and the tanking and all this stuff. How big was that pick swap? Do you think that it was a big deal? There's so many people that say, well, they only moved up 2 spots. Was it really that big of a deal? How do you view the pick swap?
That's a huge deal. I think most people, when you talk to executives, people around the NBA with this draft, they say you have to get in the top 3. That the top 3 players are, star potential players. When you talk about Fultz, Ball, and Jackson, and then there's a significant drop-off when you get to Fox and Tatum and Monk. So getting into the top 3 is huge, and I think it gives them more value if they try to shop that pick in trades, and it gives them, a chance to land a potential star if they do, in fact, go after Jackson. I don't think you reach for a guy that, like Fox or, Dennis Smith or someone like that just because they're a point guard. I think you go best player available. And Josh Jackson, the consensus is he could be a perennial all-star, a great two-way player, someone that fits really well in today's NBA. He's very efficient. I think getting to the top 3 was huge, and that pick swap really paid off. Obviously, the best scenario would have been LA falling number 4 or 5 and getting 2 picks, but I think this is the second best scenario for Philadelphia.
Yeah, so they end up with 3, but keep in mind, they also have 2 picks next year and 2 picks the year after. So how much ammunition does Brian Colangelo have to make a couple phone calls on draft night?
Oh, he has so much ammunition. I think Boston is probably the only team that has, the kind of assets that the Sixers do when you talk about making a trade. So if they want to go out and acquire a player, they shouldn't have any problem with all the draft picks and players they have. If they want to package some of their picks together to move up, move down, and add more picks, certainly that's an option. They have so much flexibility, and I think that's what the Sam Hinkie era was all about, maintaining that flexibility and just stockpiling assets. So that's why I think you could go best player available and go for a guy like Josh Jackson and say, okay, we'll address our need for point guard either in free agency or in the next draft, because there are so many picks coming up in the future. I'm really curious to see what they do. They could make a trade. I mentioned Boston with Terry Rozier and Avery Bradley, who could be available. I'm curious because Avery Bradley was linked to the Sixers at the trade deadline. I'm curious if Philly is, if they want to take that next step forward, they keep number 3 pick. They try to pursue, you draft someone like Josh Jackson. Maybe you do pursue a guy like Terry Rozier and Avery Bradley, guys like that with some of the other assets, some of the other picks. I'm curious if Boston will be willing to do that if they are going Fultz and kind of looking toward the future and don't want to pay Avery Bradley. There's so many options that the Sixers have, and I'm really curious to see what they do.
Yeah, Alex Kennedy with us. I wrote down those picks too, Alex. 36, 39, 46, and 50. It almost begs that, to fit all those guys in, you almost think they have to package a couple of those picks, right?
Yeah, I mean, either you package those picks together and move up, or you draft and stash. That's been something that we've seen a lot of teams do when they have this many second round picks. You draft a guy that's going to play overseas for a year or two and develop over there, and then eventually come over. That happens a lot in the second round. I think that's why you see a lot of guys that are pretty talented college players that go undrafted, but it's because a lot of these teams want to draft and stash with those second round picks. So I think that's a possibility. Even if they don't package all those picks together, let's say they package two together, the other two picks could be used to draft and stash. So there are a number of possibilities that you can do when you have that many second round picks. It's always better to have more picks. There's no downside to having all those options and that much flexibility. So they're kind of a team to watch, in the draft. And this year is interesting because this draft class is so good. There are guys that are, falling to the second round that are one and done players that, have a ton of potential, that are very young. So it's very possible that this could be one of those drafts where in the second round you can find a player that could end up becoming, a real difference maker for your team, just because there's so many talented guys in the first round that it's pushed some really good players that have a lot of potential down to the second round when they normally would be, potential lottery picks.
Alex Kennedy, hoopshype.com is with us. Okafor, you hearing anything about him? Do you think Colangelo submits and just gives him away for a bag of balls or something? Or is there any value there? You think he moves him at the deadline?
Well, I think they're gonna look at their options closer to the draft. Things have been pretty quiet lately, but I think as the draft approaches, that's where talks pick up between teams. I certainly think they're going to shop him and see what's out there. I don't think they give him away. It doesn't really make sense to give him away. The better option would be hold on to him, hope he has a strong beginning to the year, and then either you keep him and make it work long term if he really comes out and plays really well, or he plays well enough to increase his trade value, and then you look to trade him at the deadline. Trading him right now, whenever they fail to trade him at the deadline, he's coming off of a bit of an off year. I don't think it makes much sense to trade him right now when his value's at its lowest. I'd be surprised if they did that unless there was something going on behind the scenes and he wanted out and there was a problem there. Otherwise, I would hold on to him and just try to get that value up a little bit before trying to move him.
Yeah, he should be an interesting storyline on draft night. You wonder if there's a team out there that does value him and the Sixers go Okafor in 3 and try to do something. You wonder if the Sixers feel better. If you're Philadelphia, now you mentioned how much more valuable 3 is than where 5 is. But how about 2 picks? If they were able to say, hey, Sacramento, you want your pick back? You know what I mean? Like, you got 10 and 5. How about 3 and Okafor? We'll take 10. I mean, they have the ability to get that opportunity. So does 2 picks for them outside of the top 3, is that better than being in the top 3?
Well, potentially. I mean, that could be really interesting because if they don't feel like Jackson's a good fit for them, and you move down to, let's say, they take that deal with Sacramento and they can get, as you mentioned, number 5 and number 10, then you can get De'Aaron Fox most likely at number 5, and at number 10 you can go best player available and either put another guy in that backcourt, go after a good defensive player, because I know they want to put defenders around Ben Simmons or good shooters around Ben Simmons. This team has enough holes that it could make sense to get 2 of the top 10 guys versus 1 number 3 overall pick. So I'm curious to see if they do something like that. It's definitely a possibility. And look, Okafor could still have value around the NBA. He's 21 years old, and I think most executives believe that it takes a long time for big men to develop. Whereas point guards and shooting guards, they typically come in and make an impact right away. It takes centers a while to develop physically, mature, and then be able to make an impact. Certainly his game is more old school, doesn't really fit in today's NBA as much, but I think he still has value as a 21-year-old big man, who has great footwork, who can score the ball. So there could be a team out there. All it takes is one team to show real interest in him, and he's certainly shown some flashes. So he could still have some value.
When you say his age just being 21, that is kind of eye-opening. The fact that Embiid is older than Okafor is, and then just because Embiid has missed 2 years, you kind of don't put those together there. But Embiid is 23 and Okafor just 21 years old. Real quick before we let you run, tomorrow night you've got the Spurs and the Warriors. Kawhi Leonard I guess he expects to play, but are you giving the Spurs a shot in this series at all?
I really don't think so. Even if Kawhi plays, I think, he'll be – I can't imagine him being even 80, 90% just because he's dealing with multiple ankle ailments now. So they really need him. He's so important to them on offense and defense. If they don't have Kawhi at 100% or even 90%, then they're going to have a really tough time. And this Golden State team is just so loaded. I'd be really stunned if the Spurs were able to upset them.
All right, Alex Kennedy, of course, hoopshype.com, at Alex Kennedy NBA on Twitter, as the NBA playoffs continuing for the June 1st finals, which we might be having no basketball for about a week and a half the way these things are going. We'll catch up soon, Alex. Appreciate it, man. Have a good weekend.
Thanks a lot. You too.